Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, the Squier Sonic Mustang. Great out of the box, even better for a mod? Keep watching and find out. The Squier Sonic, the latest iteration of Fender's budget Mustang, moves us away from the HH configuration of the Bullet Mustang and towards the more traditional two single coils. With the styling of the classic Mustang evident here, Fender Squier has kept the price reasonable on this by going with budget components like dime-sized pots. And of course, under the pickguard, ceramic strip single coils, which in this case are halfway decent because they're using the double ceramic magnets as opposed to the single strip. And as you can see from these readings, the output of these pickups are halfway decent, so they're highly usable in my opinion. Non-switchcraft switch, of course, which seems to function without any problems. Conductivity test reveals indeed this is shielding paint. Turning the neck, you've got a nice smooth satin maple fretboard here with 21 narrow tall frets, and of course this is a shorter 24-inch scale length overall, which should be really comfortable for young players or smaller hands. And of course the satin finish on this is just fine. Definitely not glossy, but overall pretty good feeling on the hands and pretty fast playing. Now if we check out the depth of the first fret of the Mustang, we get a reading of about 23.7. If we compare this to the depth of the first fret on the Squier Bullet Telecaster, that was 22.6. So you get a little more thickness on the Mustang, which is kind of nice. So for the mod, what I'm aiming for here is a more traditional Mustang look and functionality. I'm going to keep the same pickups, electronics, etc., but I'm going to replace the pickguard with this American Mustang pickguard and two Switchcraft DP/DT switches. We're going to go with this diagram, which I recreated and slightly modified from a schematic I found online. This is going to replace a three-way switch for pickup switching and give us parallel and series switching too. I'll link to this in the description, as well as a link to the original schematic. I'm also going to go through the description of the work in this video pretty quickly to be brief and so as not to bore everybody to death. And so if you have any questions with regards to the wiring, you have any stumbles, etc., please feel free to reach out to me and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Again, link to the diagram in the description. Anyways, to begin with, we're just going to loosely put the control plate in place, and we're going to snug the pickguard up against the neck heel, and this is just because the American Mustang pickguard is a bit too large for the Squier Sonic body, so I want to trim a bit before I start wiring everything up. Make sure the pickguard end sits just under the control plate, and then grab your grease pencil and oops, another old Niles Thrompton screw up. That's it, I'm quitting YouTube! Anyhow, after that short quit, on to cutting into the bottom of the pickguard here, clipping out along the line, and then I just want to cut the cavity for my switches, so I slap the pickguard down and mark my switches out like this, and then I put my switches down right about where they're going to sit, and I want to trace a wide as line as possible while staying within the pickguard, because I'm going to have some leads bridging both sides of my switches, so I'll need a bit more space than not. Of course, you're going to always slap your pickguard down to make sure everything's still in balance. Here's the cut, just wide enough and a bit of shielding tape for the controls. You note as well that I routed the cavity a bit deeper, just make sure the switch is all clear. On to ye old wiring here. Now I recommend beginning with what I call the crossovers, and those are just the biggest leads that give the cross switch connections. I also recommend using primary wire, otherwise known as doorbell wiring, because that's pretty stiff and malleable and stays in shape once you get it in place. And so I want to start with the crossover on switch 1, the green wire of the diagram. And after you've soldered that first connection, you can gently move the lead over a bit with a pair of pliers if you need more clearance. And then continue with your other connections. Notice a stray lead hanging in the shot here. Lead in the shot, that's it, I'm quitting YouTube again. Anyhow, so you can just move on to the second switch here, the crossovers. And you can breeze through this quickly if it's all in place. After the crossovers are done, you can move on to the rest of your body wires for the switches. Then I'd recommend soldering in the leads connecting the switches together, like the red wire you see in the diagram here. And then for the next step, you'll be ready to connect the leads from the pickups as appropriate, like the hot neck wire you see here. Then you can move on to attaching the additional pickup leads, such as the ground from the neck pickup here. Now for the ground connector. To connect the ground from one switch to the other, you can solder to the side of the second switch, but if it's easier, you can just solder to the top screw on the second switch as I've done here. It works the same as connecting to the side of the switch, and it makes it easier also when you drop in your ground wire going to the volume pot, as I'm doing here. So anyways, here's the final wiring. Again, with my shaky hands and mediocre soldering skills, I can do a project like this pretty easily. So yeah, I went through that wiring explanation and couldn't cover every step just for the sake of time, but just follow the diagram and I'm confident this should be pretty easy for you. Now I know what you're gonna ask here when you see the final product. Hey, you left the switch in. Why? Well, it's mostly so I could point at it, like the guy from the ProGuitarShop.com videos, kind of late 2000s, early 2010s, how he was always pointing. This switch here controls the switch that goes to another switch. Actually, if you want to know, I found a diagram online that seemed to be verified, followed it, unfortunately in the end found out it was full of dead spots and simply didn't work. So yeah, that took me a whole lot of time, cost me what was left of my sanity and my dignity, and now I'm a shell of a man, but finally landed on a functional diagram which I've shared with you. A bit of smoothing needed still on the pickguard at the bridge and the control plate, but overall everything functions. As for the functionality, the bottom switch is the pickup selector switch, the top switch is position 1 parallel standard, position 2 kill switch, and position 3 both pickups in series. Well folks, there you have it. The Squier Sonic Mustang. Great little guitar right out of the box, and made a bit more useful with these mods. On the stock guitar front, I want to say I was impressed by the rise in quality of this over the Bullet series. Where I found those Bullet series guitars to be sometimes a bit rough and even not very well finished, I don't have a hard time recommending this, especially if you've got smaller hands, or if you just prefer something closer to Gibson scale length, or if you're used to playing traditional Mustang or Duo Sonic, one of those Fender kind of shorter scale guitars. Nice budget guitar and sweet little mod platform too. Now on to the mod. It did give this a nice extra switching option, plus I'm happy that I was able to shift this back to the more look and feel of a traditional Mustang with the slider switches. As you heard in the demo, the series switch gives this a nice little boost even with these stock ceramic pickups still in place, And with the pickup switch in, I can use that for coil splitting in the future if I want to put in a rails pickup or whatnot. And knowing my insatiable thirst for mods, that's more likely than not. And of course, owing to the difference in size and pickguards, there's going to be some space here with the hardtail bridge in place, as you can see. I might put a traditional Mustang tremolo in here in the future. Let me know if you'd like to see that in the comments. Now, some may question the wisdom of going to all this work just for parallel series switching. And yes, that's a totally valid point. It's important to point out that to get that parallel series switching, you can definitely go a much simpler route. You can even just keep your existing pickguard, for example, and drill a hole and use the DPDT switch, or just replace the tone pot with a push-pull pot to get the same effect. As I mentioned, the original intent of this project was to follow a much more complicated schematic, which would have given me series and parallel switching, in phase and out of phase, and a dark switch. But when I finalized all the soldering, plugged it in, giddy as a schoolboy on his first date, I found out the hard way it was a faulty diagram and that it just didn't work. So I started with a grander design and had to desolder and start over with the new schematic, do it all over again. But the upshot is a learning lesson about faulty online wiring diagrams and a schematic that actually works, which I have shared with you. Anyways folks, that's about it. Fun little guitar, great little mod platform, and hey, a great start for anyone looking to recapture that old-time Mustang magic, or if you're just looking for a very value-priced, shorter scale guitar. Anyhow guys, that'll do it for the Squier Sonic Mustang review and mod. Thanks again for joining me. Hope you had fun. Keep on playing and keep watching the channel for a whole lot more.